Hello, everyone, and welcome to an event where we're going to be discussing the future of young conservatism and conservatism with 5 very diverse ideologically young conservatives. Thank you all for coming on. Maggie, you want to get started and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Maggie Anders. I am 22 years old from the state of Louisiana, and I currently work in fundraising, but my background is in youth leadership in the conservative movement. So I'm really excited to dive in today to talk about how to get more Republican young people.
Great. Zach, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Zachary Miller. I'm from Texas. I'm 23 years old. I'm a graduate student at Ohio State, and I founded and run the Bull Moose Society, which is an organization for young college students trying to get involved in a more populist era for the GOP. We have chapters on a handful of college campuses. So,
Great. Gavin, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, Gavin Wax. I'm the president of the New York Young Republican Club. I'm also I serve on the national committee for the Young Republican National Federation. I consider myself a populist conservative, and it's great to be here.
Great. Julia, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Julia. So I guess when it comes to my part in the conservative movement, I'm an author, I'm a commentator, but mainly I like to describe myself as an activist because I feel like the real work is out on the streets, is boots on the ground. But other than that, I like to write, I like to put content out there, and that's about it.
Great. Thank you. Joshua, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, hi there. My name is Joshua Scott, and I was the Republican nominee in California's 32nd congressional district in both the 2018 and the 2020 election. I am 28 years old, and as a proud young conservative, we had the top performing Republican congressional campaign in all of LA County in both the 2018 and 2020 elections. It was a grassroots movement. We had boots on the ground, which, like Julia said, is so important. And one of the reasons for our success was in 2020, our campaign slogan was no apologies, because a lot of us who support conservatism, support the America First movement, support populism, have been attacked so viciously by entities in the media and the left over the years. And so we came out and said, hey, those of you who feel forgotten about and suppressed and censored, we stand with you with no apologies. And so that's why we founded the No Apologies Patriot organization, which I am the founder and president of. We will be launching sometime this summer, which I hope to have you all involved with. And it'll definitely be focused on a lot of grassroots conservatism in the LA area, with the focus being on, being an unapologetically conservative.
Great, thank you all. So just disclaimer, no one got the questions ahead of time. We just got the sections that we're going to discuss. And if you see me looking down a lot, it's because I have a binder here for my research. So we're going to jump into the first section, which is, what does it mean to govern conservatively in 2021? So just to pose the first question to Zach, and then everyone jump in and discuss. We've seen a lot of changes in the approval ratings for Republican governors. Previously, it was governors who were Republicans in New England, like Charlie Baker, who had high approval ratings. But now that's sort of switched to Ron DeSantis people who are opposing the lockdowns. So do you believe that lockdowns and the issues with COVID restrictions, are those topics conservative governors are leading on nationally, or are they topics that will fade over time?
yeah, I think really, you kind of get down below the surface level. The lockdowns are an important issue, but obviously that's over and done with. So moving forward, I really think that the average everyday conservative Republican voter knows that the dream, the kind of facade of limited government, small government, is over, and it's unachievable. And the only thing left is who's going to control the government, who actually is going to, kind of wield these reins of power, which is why I think you have someone like Ron DeSantis stepping into the void, being very popular, because Ron DeSantis has shown that he has no problem at all with seizing these reins of power, using them against his enemies, and kind of pushing an affirmative worldview for conservatism, and it's working. He's popular in Florida, he's popular among Republicans nationally, and he seems to be the heir apparent to Donald Trump.
Does anyone want to jump in on that to comment on that?
I would just say I agree with Zach. I think Republican voters are sick of the slogans of the Reagan era. I think they want action. I think what we've seen over the last year, but more importantly over the last decade, has shown that the left are not scared of wielding power against the right, against their political opponents. And if Republicans are going to get real about fighting back against what's happening in our country and society at large, we have to stop fearing using the power of the state to push back against the left. We're fighting a multi-front war, economically, culturally, in whatever other fields you want to consider. And just simply, talking about the boogeyman of socialism or just, small government talking points, that's just not going to cut it anymore. It's not going to cut it politically in order to win elections, and it's not going to cut it in terms of having effective governance. I think if we really want to understand the kind of fight we're in right now and what our country faces, we need to be willing to use real action. And I do agree DeSantis has been quite effective at that front, and you've seen him benefit politically from that. And you've seen other governors, for example, Kristi Noem, who failed to act on the voters' interests, and she's seen a collapse in her popularity. So it makes sense politically to follow this path that me and Zach are talking about. I also think it makes sense for the better of the country as a whole to move forward, being aggressive and pushing back against the left, and not just clinging on to these purist ideals of what it means to be a conservative or what it means to be anyone on the right.
Yeah, I'd also like to add to that, as Zach mentioned, the lockdowns and the other antics of 2020 that were met with a lot of disapproval from conservatives and even moderates and liberals. That is all over, but a lot of the politicians, both unelected and elected, in counties, states, and local municipalities they're being put under a lot more pressure right now by people that witnessed everything that happened. And so you have a lot of people, boots on the ground, showing up to school board meetings, asking for transparency from county health officials, showing up to county supervisors' offices and asking questions. And I think future conservative leaders for governor and Senate, big races like that, Congress, local elections, they need to be warriors that are willing to be in the streets with us and show up with the activists, show up with people, be posting on social media, not just slogans against socialism, like you said, but showing that you represent freedom. You're not just there taking your donations and hanging out on social media. You're out there, you're in the streets with the warriors and showing that you're a real leader and not just a politician.
So I represent the mindset of one of those limited government people. I think socialism does suck, and I do think that government tyranny and authoritarianism is one of the biggest threats of our lifetime. And I understand that lockdowns are no longer an issue for us, but I think it did awake a lot of Americans to the fact that the government can use that kind of power to basically imprison us in our homes. I don't think that we actually disagree on the Ron DeSantis types. I think conservatives need to be extremely reformist minded, because what it is that we're conserving is not conservative, in my opinion. I don't believe we have a limited government. I think the people that are the boots on the ground pushing back are actually more liberty minded than we might give them credit for. And I think that libertarianism and populism actually have an opportunity to kind of fuse together to defeat the old guard of the GOP, if that makes sense.
I agree with some of that, and I definitely think there's been a false dichotomy that's painted between maybe people who are more fusionist in terms of being socially conservative and fiscally conservative, and those on the populist right. I think there is a paleo-libertarian movement. I think there's a lot of people like, the Ron Paul movement who share a lot of similarities with this rising populist movement that I'm a part of. I used to be a Ron Paul guy. I used to be much more libertarian, but I've moved forward because I'm seeing what's actually happening in reality, not just exclusively either in economic textbooks or theory. I'm seeing that there is a fusion of global corporate power with the state. And many times they're very, it's hard to even distinguish which is which anymore. And I don't think the conservative movement at large has kept up with the changing times. And they continue to think that, yeah. And I think, I think a lot of people are starting to realize that. And I think that's where we can find common ground. I think the frustration a lot of people have with the socialism talking point is that it doesn't really encapsulate what we're facing. I think, socialism is an economic system. I really don't see us facing an issue of socialism. I see us facing an issue of corporatism or merging, corporate and state power. I see us facing social and cultural decay and degradation, which isn't really covered by the slogan socialism. So I think people have pushed back on it because it just doesn't really explain what's happening. Not that they necessarily all support big government, but I definitely think because of what we've begun to see, and because we've seen such weakness from elected leaders on the right, there is maybe this overpowering push to counter the sort of, laid back, limited government approach to things, because we've seen such ineffective leadership. And had it not been for that leadership, I still think the fusionist model of the Republican Party could have survived, but because they failed to essentially do their job and represent their voters, now they're seeing a massive pushback with the populist right.
So
I also
I'd
think-
argue that, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd argue that we have not been living within a limited government. I mean, I refer a lot of my political ideology, I refer to it based off of what I've seen in the state of Louisiana, which is you may look at the politicians and call them laid back, but that's because they don't want to do anything. But our current corporate tax structure, there's like 430 pages of exemptions, carve outs, all of that.
Oh, we don't have limited government. They
Our-
just use the
yeah.
slogans, which is what's not
Right,
helping
right.
us.
Sure. So maybe the slogans, you're completely correct, are not great and they don't hit home with, the conservative voting base anymore. But I would say, like, my version of what is needed for bold leadership in Louisiana is someone to come and like completely clear out our state constitution and reform our tax structure and stop spending so much money on education without there being transparency. And all of those are very liberty-oriented policies, and all of those are very actually limited government type policies, but that is bold conservatism. And I think that would work around the United States. And I think a lot of the reasons that we have so many problems with corporations being in bed with the government is because we give them so many handouts, and corporations know that they can go to these politicians and ask them for favors. And there's a lot of behind the scenes deals because they are in bed together. And that is not a feature of limited government.
Sure.
That is
I
No, I don't think anyone on the
Yeah.
populist right thinks we're fighting against some Jeffersonian,
Mhm.
limited government democracy. I mean, I think, that would be great as an ideal. But I think we all realize that there is this kind of blending of corporate and state power, which you're talking about with the rent seeking,
Mhm.
with all these things. But then it goes beyond that because, we're also facing issues of trade. We're facing issues of immigration. And many times the response of the Republican establishment is, well, whatever's best for the GDP is best for the country. And I think they see everything in these utilitarian, numeric kind of mindset where it's like, okay, well, we can open the borders, we can have completely unrestricted trade policies, and that may boost the GDP, that may raise corporate balance sheets. But what does it really mean? There are actually consequences, and they don't want to look at that because it's not in their corporate donors' interests. So I agree with you on the tax code. I agree with you on maybe reforming state constitutions and all the rest. But then when it comes to some of these big issues that really paved the way for Trump, which were issues no one was talking about for a long time, immigration and trade, there's very few answers from many in the traditional Republican establishment or even libertarians who seem to think, and I'm not speaking for you, I'm just speaking in general, who may seem to think, okay, open borders, looser trade, all good things, GDP goes up, we're happy, that's all,
Yeah.
case closed.
I think
Well,
a lot of
I
those
don't
people,
think
though,
Yeah.
a lot of
So-
those people, who, and this is a fusionist talking point for a long time, that, we need to, kind of double down on this, this sort of fiscally conservative, kind of more libertarian-esque thing where we're deregulating, where we're, going after corporations by getting rid of carve-outs and things like that. I think we're really missing the voters, because I don't think voters care so much about that. They look at Amazon, they look at Walmart, and when they interact in their lives, it's because they're driving small businesses out of business. They are, creating a monopoly on employment in some cities and some areas. Really, I mean, these people that we're talking about, and you see them in Louisiana, but you also see them in Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, right? They are social conservatives, right? Which is kind of what us populists like Gavin and I will double down on. But then they're also economically left of center, if not outright left wing, which is why a lot of them voted for Bernie Sanders. A lot of them did. And I mean, we have to acknowledge those people, and those people are essential to our new coalition, because the fact is, Arizona, Georgia, those states probably have left us, at least, for some time. But Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, right? Texas, places like this are still ours, and we can keep them. We can expand our lead in them if we go after these people who haven't been voting Republican for a very long time. And they are now because of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump opened the door to get rid of the old GOP economic orthodoxy, which benefits absolutely no one except for, very wealthy people and corporations, and use the government to benefit people who are average, everyday working folks who also happen to be social and cultural conservatives.
To jump into that, I just want to pose another question in the phase of the fusionist idea. Joshua, you're in California and you're seeing a really big pushback against Gavin Newsom. We're seeing that in similar states. New York has obviously had some issues with Governor Cuomo. And what I find interesting is that there is a disparity in how Republicans on a national level market themselves with the big ideas and how they market themselves on the state level. So do you think that on the state level in California, are those ideas that they're pushing, low taxes, recalling Gavin Newsom, infrastructure, are they things that you think could be applied to other governors or other races in other states as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back, the whole talking about limited government, I think, while it can be a little bit of a dated idea, I think it's quite relevant right now due to what did happen in 2020 with the way someone like Gavin Newsom acted, right? With these illegitimate executive orders, extensive emergency powers, and allowing unelected, health officials develop policy essentially, and then call it law without any sort of state legislature approval. So I think, those are things that resonate with voters right now here in California saying, hey, this whole idea of big government, is something that does need to be combated. And, I think the narrative regarding the recall of Gavin Newsom has been kind of taken in a couple different directions, because some people have, say Gavin Newsom needs to be recalled because of, liberal policies such as, implementing a new gas tax and, like open borders and things like that. But when we're dealing with an actual recall, removing somebody from government, I think it has to do with a lot more actual corrupt type stuff, such as not enforcing federal immigration laws with the fact that California is a sanctuary city. You have the fact that the Second Amendment is constantly being attacked by the state legislature, and then once we got into COVID, you had like I said, mandatory masking on children and unconstitutional lockdowns on businesses, all the while people are gathering in the streets en masse without masks on, with seemingly large-scale support from some of these same officials. So that type of hypocrisy and illegitimate governing is how you need to kind of put pressure and use those examples on these types of people, and not just kind of focus on those little issues such as like infrastructure and things like that when it comes to the grand scheme of things. Now, when we are talking about things like infrastructure, I do believe that staying with the conservative message and kind of focusing on what happened in 2020 can be of benefit to us. But when we're moving to actually remove somebody from office right now, it can't just be because we disagree with their liberal policies. This is because they've done some unconstitutional things, some very corrupt things, and they're not here to enforce laws that keep Americans safe.
And
I don't think there's any disagreement on the lockdowns. I think, when it comes to that from a limited government perspective, I think everyone on the right is pretty much in unison. No one here, as far as I know, or that I know of, is supporting some kind of technocratic public health run state or society. I think there was a lot of unity in pushing back against the lockdowns, all the mask mandates. I think that's an issue that everyone has common ground with. But I do feel like, that's a good talking point for limited government. I think if you're trying to go to the areas that Zach was mentioning, struggling Rust Belt towns, Appalachia, going there and telling them, with their cities and towns where all the industry is left, where big pharma is pumping them with opioids, where there's literally no economic livelihood left, that their biggest issue is limited government. I think, they want a bit more nuance. They want to say, well, is it really, or is it our trade policies that have sent jobs overseas? Is it our mass migration, which have lowered domestic wages and pushed us out of jobs? Those are things that they would much rather hear than, socialism's bad and, we need to return to a limited government. Obviously, when it comes to the lockdowns, that's a completely different story. And I think there's a lot of commonality there and common ground. But I just think it sometimes gets all jumbled up together. And I think politically speaking, if we want to win, like Zach said, we need to be able to expand the coalition, because we've already lost the suburbs. We've lost a lot of these traditional fusionist areas. Many of those areas that have been traditionally fusionist are now pretty much shifting away from social conservatism anyway. And the only areas you're going to find, kind of socially conservative voters are places where they're not necessarily so rigid economically, that they're much more flexible. They're open to protectionism. They're open to, immigration restrictionism. They're open to, maybe even trust busting and other things that may be popular on the populist right. And I think that's where you'll engage voters and give them new ideas, because you're not going to win over a lot of these guys with Reaganite talking points.
And just to follow up with that, I wanted to ask Julia this because you're in commentary, you're in a lot of those areas. In 2020, there was no new GOP platform. It was recycled from 2016. The official reason was the pandemic, but Democrats did have a new 2020 platform. There was a lot of conversation that this new platform didn't come to be because the Trump campaign and conservative activists did not agree on how to rework it and have it as something that could go forward with fusionist ideas. So Julia, do you think that on a marketing level, the GOP is not doing enough to share its own accomplishments or its own positions for governors and people who are governing on a local level?
I think that their messaging is all wrong. And I think that, going back to the topic that was discussed a little bit earlier, we have the basis of conservatism and progressivism is just like progressives want change and conservatives want to conserve. So if you think about that from a psychological level, people who are conservative, they just want to be left alone. They don't want things to change. They don't want things to move forward. And progressives are aggressively searching for change. So the politicians nowadays, they don't know how to cater to people, because in a lot of the sense, so far, conservatives relied a lot on the politicians to do worry a lot about the public policy. If we think of George Bush and all of those people, and even Reagan, we relied a lot of those people. We looked up to them, but now we feel like it's changing because of how aggressive the left is. We want to be more involved, but the politicians don't really know how to approach us. They don't know how to bring us into the game. They don't know how to market and how to message to us. And I think that they're very, if you look at my email, you'll find 300 different GOP messages from 2002 type of marketing scams. Just open this now, it's your last chance, whatever. They're not listening. They're not looking at people. They're not looking at the movement. That people are realizing that the fact that they have not been involved, the fact that they have sat back and allowed for things to happen and allowed for leftists to push whatever policies they wanted, people are realizing that that's not working because the leftists have gone too far. So people on the right now, they really want to get involved. They just don't know how to, but they want to get involved. They want to show up to these rallies. They want to be a part of the public policy. They want to be a part of, these different meetings, these different halls. And it's, to me, I feel like it's very difficult for somebody who's never been into politics. A lot of people are like, I don't want to be involved, but I think we need to have some sort of strategy to educate people on how to get involved, on how to be a part of things, on how to perhaps, if you want to start your own little protest, how can you get how can you go get a permit for it? What do you need? If you want to start your own group, your action group, if you want to start different things, if you want to go complain about things, if you want to go to the city hall, how do you get involved? I think that people are craving to get involved in all possible ways. Conservatives are no longer laying back and just letting things happen. They want to be a part of things. And that's what Donald Trump did that was so impressive, is that he brought us into the game. He was a person that was approachable. And politicians need to realize that their old ways is not going to cut it anymore.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that 100% on, conservatives. They're not apathetic. They want to be involved. And a lot of the reasons why you don't see as much conservative involvement is because there's a disconnect in the messaging. And, all of us here, we've all brought in some different views and ideologies and perspectives on conservatism. But I think one of the issues towards things going, as far as boots on the ground, is that, when there's a conservative, regardless of what sort of faction of ideology you come from, you have a very well coordinated and well funded left, whether it be the media or academia or elected officials, that immediately combat what you're saying with a narrative that says you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, you're a racist, you're a bigot, and the list goes on with all of those trigger words. And so I think it's such a huge responsibility for us as young conservatives, as we're mobilizing our base, regardless of what perspective we're bringing, is that we're able to, help educate our base and our friends on not just promoting our ideologies, but being able to stand there composed and educated and articulately, take apart that narrative and combat the narrative that we're racist and all these other trigger words. And until we're able to kind of push back and seize that narrative, and it's going to be extremely difficult. And I think one of the reasons why people are so displeased with conservative and Republican elected officials is that they kind of hide back on, oh hey, I'm low taxes, and oh right, Trump was right about China, we need to be tough on China, while they're being lobbied by big tech that's obviously run by China. So we need leaders that are going to be unapologetically combat that narrative of negativity towards conservatives, and I think that'll help us become further our movement and become strong leaders with the grassroots.
Yeah, there's a
also
lot of
think that
people
there's
who are
a lot of-
afraid to sorry, Gavin, just to add something real quick.
Yeah,
That's, a lot of people are afraid to say that they're conservative or whatever because they're afraid to be branded as racist. But I think that one of the things that the right is doing right now that I think is very helpful is that they're saying, before they used to say, oh, I'm not a racist, but now they're saying, I don't care. I really don't care. Like, if you want to call me a racist, go for it. You can call me anything. And even in the aspect of racism, the whole narrative, it goes against the fact that everybody has different biases. So if somebody's biases is against race, somebody's bias is against age, if somebody's bias, everybody has biases. So if you want to call me whatever it is that you want to call me, you don't know me. You don't know who I am. I know who I am, and you're not going to silence me, because those are silencing practices. They're just trying to get people to be quiet so that whenever I stand up to say anything, people are going to try to put me down by immediately saying that. And the right is rising up to that and say, whatever, you can call me whatever you want. I don't care. I don't have to explain myself to you. Now here it is, I'm going to push over whatever it is that I want to say, and you just deal with it. And I feel like that's a very powerful type of energy that we have right now.
I think for the original question was interesting about the platform. I think it just goes to show we're obviously in a political realignment in the country, and there's a lot of realignment going on within the party. And I think it shows that the party apparatus, the leadership, the establishment, if you will, is just scared to deal with this, and are clearly behind on the times and don't want to adapt and don't want to understand where the base is at. They're kind of living in a bubble, a beltway bubble, and how they approach politics, how they approach the issues facing the country. So the platform may have seemed like a little thing on paper, but it actually was showing a much larger problem through the Republican Party, which is a massive disconnect with its voters. Now, I'm all for the big tent. I obviously am more on the populist side, but I do think as a party we should be a big tent, and we should be regionalized. There are things that are going to work, in a Maine or a Massachusetts that are not going to work in a Texas. So I don't really care about Susan Collins in Maine because she's the best we're going to do. So that's whatever, and I'm not going to go after them. Let the local parties, frame what's best for their specific states or regions or localities. But as far as a national strategy and a national message, I think we definitely need to shift things a bit from this old fusionist model, not to rehash that prior argument. And then as far as the racist thing goes, I think Julia is 100% right. I think there's a pushback on the right. People, they're growing up in the digital age, especially like the Zoomers and young kids. They just don't care anymore. They just don't care about what scares the Kevin McCarthys. They don't really care about what scares the elected officials. They're not really scared about being called racist, and that may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing. But it's become kind of like the boy who cried wolf, and anyone to the right of Ruth Bader Ginsburg is basically a racist now. And that's always been the attack line that made elected Republican officials basically bend over backwards and concede on their supposed principles, because they didn't want to be called bad names by the press, by the media. They didn't want to get disinvited to cocktail parties, whatever it is. That power that they had over electeds basically came to an end with Trump, and he showed a lot of Republicans how to fight back, how to punch back. And even if you don't necessarily agree with his policies, his mode of politicking and the way he carried himself, the way he handled the press, that's being emulated by DeSantis, you learn to punch back. And I think until, this is not really an ideological question, but the sooner the right and elected Republicans learn how to fight back, to punch back, to not accept the left's frame and narrative, that's when they're going to start seeing political windfalls, regardless of what their underlying policies are. They may be disagreeing on policies, but if you can't even learn to fight back and you can't even learn to have a backbone, that's where you're going to lose a lot of respect. That's where you're going to let the left frame you. If someone like Noam came out and said, oh, I'm not going to do the transgender ban because here's my reasoning. No, she just looked weak. She just looked weak and she backpedaled. So that's going to continue to happen. And until people get that, they're going to keep losing their elections.
I think that, a lot of the politicians right now, they need to realize that very quickly, because if you follow the Trump model of like not caring and actually getting stuff done, you're actually looking at and talking to the people and not talking to the academia, to the media, to all those people in power. They're trying to manipulate the narrative. You're bypassing all of that and you're talking directly to the people. And for example, a lot of politicians, I like to do a lot of activism. I like to be on the ground talking to people, doing things that actually add value to people. And politicians, whenever they meet me, they're like, hey, here's my card. I'd love to talk to you. Email me, whatever. So I take their card, send an email. Hi, this is Julia. Nothing, no reply. And then whenever it's campaign year, then I get a bunch of emails. Hi, Julia, please help me, please, blah, blah, blah. So it's, to me, I feel like a lot of it is they're not genuine people. They're people who say things for the camera. They're people who go around, they try to sometimes look and be like Trump, but they can't really be like Trump. They can't really have that energy. They don't really have those things because they're not genuine people. And we can see right through their fakery. And so I think that politicians, they need to stop trying to, fake it. We know, we can see right through it. We can see right through you. We know that you're not a serious candidate. And by the way that you're interacting with people, like we see a lot of representatives who are actually interacting with people on social media, they're putting their words out there, versus others who are like, they have a page, but we know they don't even know what a Twitter is or a Facebook is. They've never even gone online. So that's the sort of thing we want. We want reality, we want connection, and no more faking.
And just to follow up, I want to ask Maggie a question. There has been this change right now between the establishment and the Trump base, but the establishment, if you want to call it that, was very successful in governor races. We won 8 out of 11 governor races. We retained the incumbents in the last election cycle. First female governors in South Dakota and Iowa are Republicans. So there does seem to be a level of success when you get down to the Republican Governors Association. So my question to you is, because I know you're more libertarian minded, do you think that that's because Republicans on the governor level are more willing to compromise and work with libertarians or with a liberty mindset and therefore have less confronting with the left because the left does not seem to attack liberty as much? Or is there another reason for it?
So I would not say that the establishment and libertarians are related to each other by any means. I think honestly, libertarians are more distanced from the establishment than we are from populists, if that makes sense. Because I think in both populism and libertarianism, those two sides of the Republican Party, because I am a Republican, by the way, I am not part of a different party. I think there's a deep distrust of the government and those who are in power and collaborating with each other to take advantage of the little guy. But I would say at the state level, I don't really understand your question very much, but I will say this: nationally, I've seen that Republicans are terrified of Donald Trump. I don't know where this assertion comes from that like they're trying to like skate around like the left. Like, no, these politicians are terrified of Trump. They're terrified of his base. And if there's anything to get a politician motivated, it is scaring them into thinking that you will basically kick them out of office if they don't vote the way you do. So I think there were probably a ton of Republicans at the federal level who wanted to vote for impeachment and did not. There was a Republican in my state who did vote for impeachment. I'm pretty sure because it's his last term. Like, I'm pretty sure he's just like giving up because the politics of the Republican Party today have gotten so absolutely insane. I will say this: Republican energy is not focused in the right areas. And I think that is the problem that, I would like to address. And I think that's really where I disagree with with a lot of the populists is I think that this over exaggeration of issues such as like Dominion voting machines or transgender bathroom bills, I think that like those issues are radicalizing to the base, yes, but I don't think the Republican Party is really giving normal politically homeless Americans a place to breathe and rest up. You know what I mean?
Well, that mentality, that's the concession. Like, 20, 30 years ago, the political topics du jour are completely different because Republicans constantly feel like they have to cede ground. And they say, oh, these issues are icky. These issues are too radicalizing. Let's see.
It's not that we can't address the issues, right? Like, I just don't think that there are that many transgender people trying to run into young girls' bathrooms. Then like
it's a winning
bipartisan issue. It's not about that. It's not about that. It's about the fact that you have everyday people who go about their business and they know intuitively that men are men and women are women. And if you see that, you've lost everything.
Right.
You cannot lose the transgender issue and win even one other issue. If you lose the transgender issue, you've lost everything permanently. You might as well put everything down and stop fighting because you've lost, period.
Right. Why do we have to concede just, objective reality? Like, why do we have to concede that? Like, the left is pushing the Overton window. They're pushing these crazy radical ideas that gender doesn't exist, that all these things that are just completely made up. They're the ones doing this crazy march to see ideologically. We shouldn't be scared to counter them. We have everything on our side. We're in the right. We are the ones that are, science is on our side. History is on our side. What's morally right is on our side. I don't know why we have to concede these issues, not to mention, politically speaking, these are bipartisan issues. Look at the transgender issue. I mean, it's overwhelming, especially when it comes to girls' sports and all these other things. When you actually put it in front of people and you remove party labels, it's overwhelmingly against the left's narrative. But we constantly cede ground and we just give it to them, that then they take that and they move to the next thing. And that's why we're in the position we're in as a country.
We don't have to cede ground on that issue, but I do think that certain people, why would I say we have to cede ground on that issue? Like, I don't believe we do. What I'm saying is that there are people who control the narratives of what people are focused on within the Republican Party. And I think a lot of them are just kind of like ridiculous issues that, like we are distracting people from like bigger issues.
These are issues that got the highest turnout for Trump, and it got a lot of these people that never voted for Republican out to vote. I mean, maybe you're going to lose a few blasé upper middle class white liberals in the suburbs, but they were already trending away from us anyway. So who cares about that? We're actually gaining a lot of people talking about election integrity, talking about cultural issues, talking about the issues of transgender bathrooms and girls' sports. I think that's getting a lot of people mad at PTA meetings. It's getting a lot of parents pissed off. It's getting a lot of people who normally wouldn't be involved in politics into the Republican camp, at least on one issue. I think when we don't touch those issues, we just look weak. We're not branching out, and we're constantly trying to appease this centrist kind of moderate voter who it really doesn't exist. That it's just this cliche that this voter exists out there that just wants to talk about tax policy. It's just not true. The bulk of people we're seeing enter into the party who are now getting involved in school board elections, who are now getting involved at the local level, it's because of cultural issues. It's because of critical race theory. It's because of Dominion. It's because of the election stuff. I mean, maybe it doesn't make great media because, the left controls that institution. They're going to come after us, but it is good politics. I can't see anyone arguing when you look at the polling, when you look at the numbers on this stuff. It's very overwhelming that it gets people engaged. And people are really much more attracted to cultural and social issues than they are about the nuances of tax policy. And I'm not disregarding tax policy, but when it comes to messaging, if we're facing these, if you have all these issues, whether it's critical race theory or the transgender bathrooms and girls' sports, and you have all this other stuff, and we're just coming back with, well, let's talk about flattening the taxes, you're just going to lose half the audience.
And on that, Maggie, just 1 second. I'll let you start the next section. I want to move on to the next section. So we're going to be talking now about what the strengths and weaknesses, strategy and policy-wise, so this will play into the next section, of young conservatives and the young conservative movement is. And I think this is really necessary because now we have the data from the last election with how Trump and Biden each did respectively with young voters. And Trump won the youth vote in states like Alabama, Indiana, Kansas, and Mississippi, whereas Biden won it in many more states, California, New York, Oregon. And the Biden amounts that he won the youth vote by over 30% in many states, whereas the Trump win was much smaller. You had 10-point thresholds, 5-point thresholds, ties in many states. So the first question is, and I'll give this to you, Maggie, as well. Do you think that the young conservative policies that we know of, if there are any that you can list right now, because everything is sort of up in the air, are they marketable to young people throughout the country, not just in one little area, but are they nationally marketable? And if they are, could you just explain what some of them are to you?
Yeah, so I think just to finish what I was saying before, I think that it's fine to focus on social issues, but if we continue to ignore the fiscal issues, our country is going to go down the drain. I mean, we're ceding ground constantly. Our debt is going insane right now, and we're pouring money into states that don't need it. I mean, like, we spent so much money last year. So that's my problem, is that we are ignoring other issues that are important and will become important to young people, because young people are going to inherit the bad fiscal policy of our parents. And as far as pushing social issues, I think there's a lot of young people that I think there are a lot of young people that do not agree with the way conservatives approach social issues. And it's not just on transgender bathroom bills, right? Like, we were talking about the party platform. The party platform is still against gay marriage, which is something that young people overwhelmingly support. I don't think there's a lot of young people, that even conservatives, that would say that they find themselves at home in the Republican Party. Honestly, I don't think anyone would say that they find themselves at home in the GOP right now. But I think we should be cautious of going to an extreme and radicalizing too far to the right socially, because, we're going to alienate the up and coming voter base in the US. And that's just how it is. I mean, it showed in the polls. Not that young people vote all that much, but they are going to be the ones in charge eventually. And the Republican Party has kind of just left us out, like, hanging out to dry. I think one of my biggest critiques of, youth Republican orgs are that they don't address, young people's overwhelming fears about technology and things coming back to haunt us in the future. I think cancel culture is probably, one of the things that I think most young people fear the most, even if they say that they don't believe it's real. They do believe it's real. I think young people have a lot of anxieties about the way the culture is going. And I think a more positive message that focuses on hope and human dignity and the ability to forgive people and the ability for people to have different opinions and different lifestyles, I think that is the winning message for young conservatism.
And I want
But
to
I know
follow, sorry,
probably
Kat.
disagree.
No, I
Yeah.
want to follow up and just ask Zach the question in that lane as well in this section. There is a lot of discussion, both in the young conservative world and the adult conservative world, the senior conservative world, about how to maintain that evangelical voting bloc that conservatives rely on in every election, no matter how deep blue the state is, while still having many young conservatives increasingly uncomfortable with the party's position on most social issues, I would say excluding abortion oftentimes. Is there a possibility of having a platform that can have something that caters to those young evangelical Christians and those young fiscal conservatives, or does it have to become a separate party apparatus?
Well, I'm not an evangelical, but I'll try my best. I mean, look, first of all, I'd like to go on the record and say that I am more than willing to alienate anyone who believes that a man can become a woman or vice versa, just putting that out there. But as for evangelicals and really, let's say,
Or
traditional religious
Christians
people,
in general, yes,
traditional
Christians,
religious
religion
people,
in general.
so whether they're Catholics, whether they're Orthodox Jews, I mean, I think really what their anxieties are is that eventually they're going to be put in a position where they cannot meaningfully be Christian, Jewish, whatever, and also be an American. I think that position is rapidly approaching. And so what we have to do, and again, as for the fiscal conservatism thing, I don't know. I don't really care about fiscal conservatism. I think it's dead and gone anyways. I care about these social issues. That's what I think most people care about. And then whatever your fiscal policy is, it enforces the social issues, right? So we need to be focused on giving young people the opportunity to build families, to get jobs, to survive on a single income, to buy a home, right? To do the things that their parents' generation, that their grandparents' generation were able to do so easily, but those generations destroyed the possibility for them to do it as well. We need to drop the bootstrap messaging that Republicans have loved for so long, because quite frankly, it doesn't work anymore, right? We have created conditions such that if you go to college, right? I mean, traditionally, you go to college, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, it's all good, you're fine. Now, if you go to college, you're probably going to delay marriage because you can't afford to get married because you have so much debt, and because you're not starting at a salary that's consistent with the amount of debt that you took on to go to school. And then when you do get married, you're going to delay having children. By the time you get around to having children, you can have one, maybe two, and that's destroying our birth rate, right? And if you're really concerned about the future of our country economically, you should be concerned about the birth rate first and foremost, because we can't have an economically sustainable country with a birth rate below replacement rate. So the GOP needs to focus on these actual issues and stop with the socialism boogeyman, stop with the, oh my God, the debt's going to kill us all. No, there are much bigger issues out here. And young people, frankly, are more concerned with what's going to affect their daily lives and what's actually happening to them as a result of politics than some abstract number on a website, seeing the debt go up. I mean, sure, I'm not saying that, the debt is we should run it up to 5 trillion. I'm not saying we should just, 500 trillion, whatever it is. I'm not saying we should just print money and, do whatever, but, too many, I don't want to say libertarians, because I mean, it's not just them. It's really fusionists more than anything. They fall into this trap where there are, kind of like what Gavin is saying, there are people out here who are just thinking about taxes. They're thinking about, the debt. They're thinking about, they don't do that. People think about what's actually happening in their life on a daily basis. They're thinking about what they're not able to do because of government policy. And we need to address those things. And we need to create conditions such that the American dream can be realized by people under the age of, 35.
I would say that taxation does directly affect people's daily lives and people's ability to get a job. I hate to bring up my state, but like this is why my state is impoverished. The same policies that everyone is saying, oh, we don't need to care about that. That is why my state is impoverished. Everyone's leaving home. Like this is a huge phenomenon in Louisiana, and it's directly correlated to not caring about the economy and letting in all of these ridiculous, muddied taxes and bad business policies through, and only caring about
at the same time though. Like I think we could all walk and chew gum at the same time. I think it's this we're doing this zero-sum game where it's that if we want to tackle election integrity and social issues, we have no policies when it comes to the economy. I would say the populist right has a lot of policies when it comes to the economy, and there's a large part of it is economics and getting our country back on the right track. I think taxes are part of that, but I think what we're seeing right now, there's no movement that's guiding the Republican Party that's saying let's not focus on taxes. I think it's overly obsessed with taxes. I think it's overly obsessed with the debt. And I don't think Zach or myself necessarily think that these are irrelevant, but I think it's pushed to such a degree and it's monopolizing the entire discussion when we have a whole slew of issues that's impacting our country. And it shouldn't be zero sum. It shouldn't just be one over the other. I mean, us talking about election integrity, social issues, transgenderism is not going to distract or take away from, the Louisiana legislature reforming their tax code. I think it's just setting up a weird comparison that doesn't exist. But I think when it comes to fiscal policies, I think the messaging could be better. I think, the debt matters because it's inflation. Inflation is killing our purchasing power. And it's also leading to the issues with, the collapse in marriage, collapse in birth rates, the ability for people to have a meaningful life where they're economically self-sufficient and independent, I think that's where the debt does come into play. And I definitely think that matters. And I think fiscal issues do matter, but the way that we're messaging around them, the way that we're making the connection between its implications to regular people, I think that's sorely missing, because
I would
again,
agree.
a lot of our messaging and our policies is directed by the donor class, and the donor class they don't really care about what's hitting the little guy. They care about, you know, the fiscal policies that hurt them. And that's why I see we have this kind of situation in this country where, you know, the biggest corporations are barely regulated, and the smallest mom and pops are the ones that are regulated and taxed into oblivion. And you see it and people see it. And then when this is brought up by people, say, on the populist left or right, the establishment of both parties attacks us for being socialist. I mean, I see it here in New York City. When the lockdowns happened, the sheriff's office was going up and down the block. They were ticketing and fining every small business. You know who they didn't ticket? They didn't ticket the Dunkin' Donuts or the Starbucks or the Chipotle's or any of the big chains. So none of these and then you look at the tax, what Bezos is paying in taxes or what Amazon is paying in taxes. I mean, none of them are paying as a percentage what a lot of the smaller businesses are paying. So I think we could point that out and we can say, hey, you know, maybe we're in a situation right now where it's not a free market. We all understand that. It's very much distorted. Let's fix this. But the powers that be don't want that to be fixed because the money is coming from one direction. And that's unfortunate. But I think we get caught in the weeds talking about just the debt in abstract or taxes in isolated, when they impact a whole slew of different things. And there's a lot of domino effects from them that are not being properly articulated. And I think the populist right gets it. I think people want, you know, again, to be able to have a nice home. They want to be able to maybe have one income to support a family. They want their purchasing power to steadily increase, not decrease. And I think there are elements of what libertarians or even fusionists talk about that could help them, from taxes, from inflation, et cetera. But again, I think we need a holistic messaging. The left gives holistic messaging. You know, AOC puts out her propaganda posters and she shows what she wants the future to look like. She shows her futuristic Green New Deal. She doesn't just limit herself talking about one issue, and the left never does. They offer a message for everybody. I don't know why we always have to limit ourselves. We can tackle all these issues at once. We could have a response to everything at once. I think we've seen the collapse of libertarianism in the US, especially following, you know, the kind of the Ron Paul revolution, is because a lot of the issues of the day, whether it was big tech or cancel culture, which you mentioned earlier, there was really very few answers for it besides limited government, the free market will sort it out. Well, people just got sick of that, and that's why they're looking for alternatives.
And on that, I'd like to bring in Joshua here because I have a question about sort of the nitty gritty of how to win the youth vote as well. On the left, there are many organizations. There's a March for Our Lives, which is now a massive organization for voter registration. There's Next Gen. There's a lot of people who are out there organizing. So on an organizational level, how does the right combat that? How do we create something like headcount.org, which has voter registration drives at over 1,000 live events and works with singers like Ariana Grande or Beyonce or Drake or Billie Eilish to do voter registration? How does the right create that apparatus, or is it even possible at this point?
Right. So like you mentioned, you know, the whole displeasure of, you know, the young people movement, and, you know, a lot of Republicans want to draw up a platform that, you know, kind of combines the evangelicals and the young people. And then all of a sudden you have a platform that kind of sounds like a fundraising email that's geared towards moderates and alienates the conservatives, which is something we've seen for so long. And with young people, you know, the whole concept of nuanced policy, they're not really able to have that discussion on the left or right, because let's face it, most kids don't know a whole lot about the nuances of economic fiscal policy and whatnot. But these organizations that are going to concerts and going to you know, schools and, you know, prevailing on social media and everything, what they're doing is they're focusing on the things that we were talking about a minute ago, like the culture war type things, you know, using the trigger words. And then when it comes to policy, they use words like free healthcare and Medicare for all and things like that. So the way we win over the youth, and the way we help the youth kind of combat these leftist movements on social media and in technology and headcount and Ariana Grande concerts, is kind of what we're going to be doing here at No Apologies. And, you know, while we are going to be advocating for a conservative message, we're going to be showing people what's really going on the local level here in LA County, such as, you know, getting involved in the local school board. But I think the main thing that I can present is showing a way to dismantle the narrative that is against us. Because when you look at these organizations on the left, they're not really presenting anything that's tangible or factual. They're presenting things that are sexy for social media, knowing that PolitiFact will not confront them. So when we are earning the support from the youth right now, while policy does need to be relevant, I think arming these people with facts and narrative and ideology to dismantle this radicalism that we're facing is going to be a little bit more important than being able to, just talk about the nuances of policy, such as if we set up a booth, for the Republican Party, a voting drive at a concert, talking about taxes and free market, while it's legitimate and relevant to these kids, it's not going to get the attention as much as, hey, we understand what you've been going through. We know that what they're teaching you is not sitting right with you. Let's help dismantle that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I had a lot of youth support in my campaign, is because they had somewhat of a safe space with me, because they would come to me and tell me about how there are Instagram accounts in the local community doxing Trump supporters on the local high school campuses, where the administrators know about it. They 100% know about it. And as many people involved in education know, these local school boards and other education departments, they have the authority to work with the social media companies to get this kind of stuff taken down. But unfortunately, it's a coordinated assault on our people. So I think kind of assisting these people as warriors and helping them dismantle the nonsense that's being brought to them is how we can kind of combat these large-scale nonprofits and PACs and tech organizations that are really helping the left take over the youth movement.
I think that really goes back to my previous point. I got to make sure I'm not on mute because I was.
No,
on
you're
mute
good.
before.
You're good.
That goes back to my previous point, in which I think the left does a great job at messaging. And as we have more common people, back in the day, we used to think that, oh, I'm going to elect somebody who's senior, who's wiser, etc., to represent me. And they will care about things like politics and the bureaucracy and foreign trade and things like that. They're way above my pay grade. I'll let them handle that. And I'll just worry about, voting for them. But nowadays, people actually crave to be involved in this process as much as possible. So whenever you talk about things like taxation and tax codes, all of that, I think it kind of like goes over my head because it's just so complex. We look at the books and we look at all these things, and I think that in a way, they have been made to be complex. They have been made by design to be complex. And one of the challenges that we have as young Republicans is that we have to simplify this. We have to simplify this message. I want to know how exactly me, who just got out of high school working at Dunkin' Donuts or whatever, how exactly that affects me. Maybe you can tell me the number, for example, oh, your paycheck will be $50 higher if this didn't happen. And that message hits me straight. I've seen a lot of the conservatives talk about things like immigration and etc. But I feel like people understand it from a very personal level of perception. How exactly is this issue going to impact me on a daily basis? And you have to make them riled up. You have to make them understand, because they don't. So you have to really push it into their heads that, listen, this is how this is impacting you on an individual level. This is how you should care about the Mexican border, even though you're living in North Dakota. This is why, this is what's happening. And the politicians rely on the fact that people do not know how to read these codes, do not know how to interpret all of that to get away with it. We want to get these politicians out, but we need to make sure that our messaging is concise so that people can come and say, listen, the left is proposing this, but what is the right proposing exactly? Like whenever Bernie Sanders, for example, he just posted on Twitter talking about, if you pay for your Amazon Prime this month, you paid more than Amazon has paid in taxes for the past 3 years. That is something that it speaks to people, because he put the number down. He said, if we pay $12.99, which is something that a lot of us do, pay the subscription, then you paid more than they have paid in taxes. It's the messaging really hits you directly because it's involving you and your paycheck and what you're doing and the numbers and how that's impacting you. And I feel like the left and the right and libertarians and all of that, we have a lot of similarities when it comes to government. We don't like big government. We want those people out. We want the establishment out. But if we just realize that in certain things, the messaging can be crafted as to, hey, let's end these people. Let's get them out of power. Let's get their 30 years in Congress out of power. I'm pretty sure that the radical left wants Nancy Pelosi as out of power as the right does. But we keep letting the media divide us, and we keep focusing on all these different problems, how we're different than the left, how people don't care. People really care about like how exactly this is going to impact me. So that's how I feel that we can, move forward, is catering the message to more localized audiences.
And I just want to pose one more question before we move on to this next section. Anybody can answer this. It's open to anybody. There are several young conservative organizations. We have YAF, we have College Republicans, we have Turning Point. I think Students for Trump is now sort of merged with Turning Point. We have a lot of smaller ones as well, but there seems to be a lack of cohesiveness. Whereas on the left, young liberal organizations often work well together. So to anybody who wants to answer, where does this lack of cohesiveness, this sort of infighting, back and forthness that we all know exists, all young conservatives are aware of it, where does it come from, and how can we maybe not get rid of it, but lessen it so that we can have a win in 22 or 24?
I mean, I think I can speak to that because recently, before I started my organization, I was removed from YAF. I built a very large YAF chapter in Baylor, hosted Ben Shapiro, did the whole thing. And because I was more of a populist, YAF emailed me and said, nope, you're no longer a member. We're kicking you out. And so I took my chapter with me. But I think that most of the problem is, and this I think really goes to the messaging question broadly, we spend way too much time focusing on colleges and college campuses because most of our people, quite frankly, aren't going to go to college. They're not on college campuses. And it's just, we spend a disproportionate amount of money trying to win over people who will never, ever think for 5 seconds to vote for a Republican. And I think that libertarians can agree on this, populist fusion. I mean, I think everyone can agree on this one. But because of that, you have a lot of, I'm going to try to be kind, but people who do this as a career, they do the college conservatism thing permanently forever, are deeply incompetent people who don't have any clue what they're doing, who probably couldn't do much else with their life. And so I think the very competent people that you find who reach college students very effectively, they move on, right? I've met a lot of, really great people in college Republicans and stuff like that. And then, now they're doing different things, right? I've met a lot of really great people in some of these other organizations. They move on quickly. So because of this, a lot of these organizations are set up to benefit kind of the donors. A lot of them are large grifts. Without saying any names, I think all of us can think of a few. So I think conservatives would do well to largely abandon the big, massive college TPUSA YAF model because it's not working. It's never going to work. And our resources would be better spent elsewhere.
Would anybody like to do a quick follow-up? Go ahead.
Yeah, so am I good?
Sorry,
so,
go ahead.
So with the whole young conservative movement, Zach touched on it on an organizational level. I want to touch it on an individual level a little bit. A lot of young people our age, whether it's late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, Gen Z, millennials are very into social media and glam, right? So a lot of young conservatives might want to be involved in something if they find a candidate or a leader that has 100,000 followers on this, or they have really pretty YouTube videos attacking their high profile incumbent opponent. But I think a good example would be my own campaign. We didn't have a lot of money and I didn't have that many followers on social media, but a lot of reason for our success is because we were out there in the hot sun all summer, sweating it out in 100-degree heat, just relating to people and getting the message out there. And, I know there's a lot of hardworking young people out there, but at the same time, one of the messages we need to get across is social media followers don't mean as much as you think it does. The fact that someone has an Escalade taking them around to their campaign events doesn't mean as much as you think it does. It really comes down to the hard work that comes along with it. So there really are a lot of amazing young conservative leaders, and they're important because they understand the paradigm of our generation, how things are done with technology and how campaigns have evolved to a modern world. But at the same time, I think we need to take a step back from the glitz and glam and understand the way that the hard work is actually done in a tangible way.
Gavin, would you like to do a quick follow-up?
I agree with a lot of what both Joshua and Zach said. I think there is an overemphasis on college campuses. Many of these organizations, you're putting so much money and resources into something where you're getting in most 4 years. Many people don't join for the full four anyway. I have a bit of a bias because I'm with the YRs, which I think covers 22 years. And basically you're living in an area you can vote in. You're a young professional. You have a job. I think it's a better return in the long term. Obviously, we need a presence on these campuses to push back against the left's indoctrination. I think it's been overblown. It has become basically this giant donor grift because a lot of the people, these elderly people in West Palm Beach, in Palm Beach, they're just basically saying, oh, let's just cut checks. We want to see, college movements. We want to see all these pretty young people doing their thing and all that social media glamour. And there's a place for it. I'm a kind of an all of the above approach type of person. I do think there's a place for it. I think people need outlets on college campuses. I definitely think they need some influencers to make them think, okay, I'm not the only one. There is a place for it. I think it's still, there's just so much resources that's needlessly going to these organizations. Many times these organizations, beyond like the social aspect, which is important in building up these, we need to do community building like the left does. I fully support that. You definitely need to create these networks and these frameworks for people to be connected with one another in order to really push back against the left. But when it comes to actual political activism, they really don't do much. I mean, they're not giving bodies to campaigns. They're not really helping candidates win. They're not providing on the ground support that Joshua was talking about, which I think is another big missing component. But it's easy to fundraise off of. It's easy for donors to jump on ship because it's this whole system that they've done. If anything, I think the conservative side of things, there's an oversaturation of groups. I mean, the left basically has, the young Dems, college Dems, which are basically one and the same, and maybe the Young Democrat Socialists of America. I mean, you listed a whole slew of lettered YAF, y'all, TPUSA, Students for Trump, the YRs, and we have a ton of different groups, and there's even smaller splinter groups, and I don't think, it's not really doing much. I mean, we have so many groups and not really a lot to show for it. Obviously, the game is stacked against us and we're fighting an uphill battle with college campuses. But I do think we need to start looking beyond people that are going for college degrees. We need to start looking to people that are going into the trades. I know a lot of people here in the Northeast that are union guys that don't have a formalized college education. They just went straight into the trades. They're plumbers, they're carpenters, they're electricians. They would love to get involved with this stuff, but no one's there really to reach out for them. And they were all Trump voters, but they really don't vote down ballot Republican. They're not tied into the party apparatus. That's a huge missing gap that Zach was talking about.
And we're going to be starting the third section. I'm going to ask you, Maggie, a question, actually. I'm sorry. We just have to keep at the time. The third section is which policies and issues are the future of conservatism in the United States and have the best chance of growing the GOP and the conservative movement. And we've discussed a lot of social issues, discussed the sort of back and forth between fusionism, but there are serious issues like healthcare and the economy. I think about 58% of young people in this country, 18 to 29, are in favor of some sort of government-run healthcare. Even more than that are in favor of just government-run healthcare completely. Young people are also the most uninsured age bracket in the country. So for the GOP going forward on issues like healthcare, which ranked number one for midterm issues in 2018, how can the GOP, first of all, put together a healthcare plan when there's so many warring factions? That's something people have to know. There's a lot of warring factions in conservatism. But how can it then market that healthcare plan to young Americans in a really aggressive manner? Because we see how prominent healthcare is every single election cycle.
God, okay. Healthcare is really not my issue. So I'm probably not the person to answer this question. But I'll just answer with what I think the winning issues are. Yes, we do absolutely need to put together a healthcare plan. There was this weirdness after Obamacare where we were like, oh, we're going to repeal it. I don't know. I remember watching the debates, and it didn't seem like anyone could give
Which debates?
The primaries, the 2016 primaries. Okay. And it didn't really seem like anyone could give an actual answer as to what they would do. In general, the party needs to sit down and rewrite the party platform. It's going to be really difficult because we do have a lot of warring factions. I think that the Ron DeSantis approach is going to be the best one moving forward. Just a general fusionism in party messaging between populism and libertarianism. I don't think that establishment messaging will work anymore. But As far as topics, I think if I were running for office, I would focus my policy priorities on free market economics. And yes, there are a million ways to message this, and you guys all mentioned this, and you're very right about this. Economics is boring, right? It's very difficult to make it real for people. The way it's real for me is, every time I drive around and see crumbling buildings, I know why it's like that. I know what the situation is for my state. And I think if we can make that real to voters, and give them a plan, I think they'd be much more interested in economics, frankly. I think education is something that we haven't touched on in this Zoom, but I think education for me is probably one of the biggest winning issues for conservatives. Critical race theory is becoming a really, really hot button issue. And I think also just making sure that parents have access to a school that will fit their kids' needs, and where they will know that their child is not going to go and get indoctrinated is really important. And I also think this is kind of an oddball one, but it's really important to me. I think criminal justice reform is a winning issue for Republicans. I do believe there is a way to message it conservatively, but I think Donald Trump did an amazing job reaching out to new populations of voters by pursuing criminal justice reform. So those would be my big policy priorities.
Anybody want to jump in?
Take a place like New York. I mean, for me, criminal justice reform is just the. I mean, all I see now are victims have no rights. I mean, if anyone has rights in New York, it's criminals. You could commit assault, you could commit heinous, violent crimes, and you're treated, with the red carpet, and all of the social services apparatus is working for you. And I'm sure it's the same in many other very liberal urban jurisdictions. So when Trump came out with that plan, I said, okay, why not if it's a low-hanging fruit? But with the crime wave we've seen since COVID and since the summer, I mean, I really think a winning issue is getting tough on crime, because there is a massive crime wave in this country. Murders have jumped 25%. I know many people personally, and obviously this is a very regional issue. It may not impact rural areas or even suburban areas. But if you look at the cities, I mean, it's anarchy, and places like New York, who's getting impacted the most? It's these minority voters, these minority communities that Republicans are always claiming they're trying to pander to or work towards to get their vote. You go to the South Bronx, you go to the outer boroughs of New York. I mean, those are the people that are suffering with the criminal justice reform mentality, getting rid of cash bail, ending qualified immunity for police officers, all this kind of stuff, and light on crime policies. It's really hurt not people that look like me. It's hurt people in the outer boroughs the most. But it's honestly, it's a massive issue, and it's only getting worse. It's only going to get worse as our economy continues to languish. So I thought it was dumb. I thought it was dumb politically. I think, this is a state level issue. If some states want to, implement it, sure. But I thought from a federal level, it was just a dumb thing to go after. It was not what his mandate was in 2016. It's not what anyone elected him to do. If anything, they elected him to be more of a strong man, to be stronger on crime, to take crime on. And I think this is a winning issue for Republicans. I think Republicans need to double down on being the party for law and order, the party fighting against crime. And I think they'd win a lot of people who are just getting sick of this, because it's starting to creep into a lot of people's neighborhoods. And again, when we talk about things that impact people directly, crime is one of them. If people feel unsafe walking their streets at night, if they have incidences with people in their family or people that they're close with that have had, that have been antagonized, that have been harassed, that have been stalked, that have been attacked, that have been mugged, that hits home. That's personal. And these DAs and these judges, they're the ones acting lawless. They're not doing their jobs. They still have qualified immunity. They can let a criminal out on the street who commit murder, and they won't face any penalties for their lackadaisical judgment. So I think this is a winning issue. I think it's a low-hanging issue that I think Republicans need to jump on. I think the whole, Tim Scott mode of this where it's just like, let's talk about second chances, let's talk about third chances, let's talk about criminal justice reform. Okay, look, there's plenty of things I'm sure we can talk about, maybe some things about minimum sentencing, civil asset forfeiture, sure, but those are very nuanced niche issues. When you talk about violent crime, the biggest issues we're facing is not civil asset forfeiture or minimum sentencing, it's lack of bail, removing qualified immunity, defunding the police. Those are all politically winning issues, and they're issues we need to pick up on.
And I'd like to just pose one question to anybody to answer in that vein. Republicans have definitely had these hard issues that they can always win on the economy. There's always about a 9-point difference. Voters tend to trust the Republicans with the economy by 9 points over the last couple of years. Republicans have a better chance of winning voters over on handling terrorism. Voters tend to trust the Republican Party by about 5 points there. With issues like criminal justice, with violent crime, with terrorism, the economy, do any of you think that those issues are still as relevant as they were in 2016? Are they gaining their relevance back? And if so, how can the GOP market and use them to grow the GOP and really improve America as a whole? Anyone who wants to answer that?
So I think they're all extremely relevant, and I think everyone in this little conference we have right now could present some great policies moving forward for the GOP. But I think what I'd like to add is the tone that we bring it with moving forward, and I think it needs to be somewhat aggressive and in your face, and relate back to the populist guys we have. Maggie brought up how education is a big one for her, and how critical race theory is a huge threat to our children right now. And when we're presenting that, you need to present, yes, critical race theory is bad, but let's take things a step further. Let's fully evaluate our entire federal Department of Education and the state departments of education, and every single one of those people in there that are promoting things that are anti-American and anti-history and revisionist and pro-terror, and just reciting Hamas talking points in the classroom, then we need to have those people fired, and we need to abolish those positions. We need to fire the people that hired them, and we need to take all that money and let's invest it back in our people. Let's invest it back in infrastructure, and let's get those homeless people off the street that these politicians claim to care so much about. We brought up healthcare a second ago, and the right likes to use the talking point of, oh, we need to knock the state borders down and bring more competition. The left likes to talk about how we need to be compassionate, we need to be like Denmark and Canada. And none of these things that the politicians like to talk about, they won't talk about how the fact that the McCarran-Ferguson Act has been in place since 1945, that allows the healthcare industry to be exempt from antitrust laws, and the only other industry that's allowed to do that is Major League Baseball, and we see what they've done over the last couple of years. So all these things are really great things to talk about, but in order to win with these policies, I think that populist tone that Trump kind of introduced us to is the only way, because we can any of us can sit here and say, oh, critical race theory is bad, and any a fundraising email might really resonate with some Republicans around the country to fundraise for the GOP and their candidates. But the way we win and continue the America First movement moving forward is the tone, and winning the narrative back and dismantling. I keep saying it over and over, dismantling the narrative that's against us in the media and academia and Democrat politics.
I think, Joshua, you bring up a great point. I think that, kind of going off of what you said, what Republicans really need to do is to identify the structures of power, the people who control our daily lives, whether those are people in the federal bureaucracy, large, massive American corporations, and we need to seize those reins of power. So we need to put our people into the federal bureaucracy. We need to recognize that you're never going to decrease the size of government. It's not happening. It's a fool's errand. So instead, put our people there. There are great organizations that are doing this work. The American Moment has kind of stepped into the void to do some of that, but we really need to focus on doing that sort of thing, so that when Joshua, as Kate kind of brings up, when we have these bold visions for what we're going to do, what we're going to replace critical race theory with, we have the means, right? We have the power to actually do those things.
Anybody else like to comment? Julia, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to lawlessness, to be honest with you, the ship has sailed. I think that everyday folk, not only they do not get the law, the respect that they deserve by the law, but they get treated like animals by those people in charge. The law is actually being used to hunt down everyday folk. They're using it to crush us with taxes. They're using it to come after our guns. They're using it to come after us if we post anything on social media, to silence us. So basically the law is being used by the people in power to destroy any kind of resistance. And that goes back to how big the government is so big that it uses its force, its law enforcement power to crush any resistance. So I think even more than focusing on making the laws a little bit tougher, I think right now, if we did that, they would just be used against us. So I think we need to take over, like Zach was mentioning, we need to take over these institutions so that we can decide what is actually moral, what is actually acceptable, and then make sure that those are being properly enforced. Because right now, I don't want more police. I don't want more I'm really thinking that the FBI, all those people, even the NSA was going against the FBI, saying that the FBI was snooping too much on people, on 16,000 Americans. So it's just, it's a power that they're taking advantage of it. And my dog's drinking water, so I'm sorry. But it's just something that I'm cautious of giving this type of government and this type of people more power. I want them to have less of it, and I want us to take over these institutions before we talk about that.
And I want to ask one other thing before I ask our concluding question, each of you. Obviously, for young people, Republican, Democrat, Independent, the issues of energy and clean energy, as well as drugs and cannabis being legalized in other states, are major issues. They are the things, aside from racial relations, that are always talked about. So several polls have put together consensus that about 39% of 18 to 29-year-olds support a Green New Deal. Over 15 states, I believe, now have legalized cannabis recreationally. Do you think that those two issues, first of all, matter in the young conservative world? Anybody can answer this and discuss it. And are they issues the Republican Party should be getting more progressive on in terms of moving away from coal and moving to other types of energy? Or are they issues where they should be staying where they are and becoming more conservative in their approach to?
I think Oh, sorry about that. The environmental issue is probably one of the areas that the Republicans and conservatives have botched completely, especially when it comes to young people. Because if you have, like, I worked with so many high schoolers and college kids over the last couple of years of my campaigns, and let me tell you, they get cornered so quickly, and they don't know how to discuss it. So what they wind up doing is they kind of cater to those around them, and they say, "Oh, I'm not one of those bad Republicans that's against keeping our air clean and everything." And that's one of the ways that we'll continue to lose if like we talked about earlier, ceding certain issues. We cannot concede, and it's such an important issue that we need to fight back on. Prager, you had a really amazing video with Bjorn Lundberg from Denmark about the effectiveness of the Green New Deal. And you can be pro-environment, you can be pro-conservation, you can be pro-clean energy, and there are so many good solutions to that. But if we need to be able to articulate the fact that pumping in billions, literally trillions of dollars into these international slush funds, that even if they went perfectly, even if everything went to the T, they would not have a genuine effect on the cleanliness of our environment. And if we can just continue to put together that show that pumping money into these environmental funds does literally nothing for the environment statistically, not just based on what I'm saying right now. And I know there are a few congressmen, I think Matt Gaetz was one of them, that wanted to bring a Green Real Deal with having to do with nuclear energy. I know hydropower is really big in California, but the state legislatures have, and actually not just the state legislatures, but the local, the state EPA and the environmental nonprofits, they will lobby so hard to shut these types of things down. They don't want to build dams because they want to save the fish that have already gone extinct. It's a huge thing in California, and the local farmers in the Central Valley are having they're having their land threatened by local authorities because of these environmental lobbyists. So like Julia said, the law is being used against everyday Americans. And the reason why they're getting away with it is because they're winning over our youth with the environmental narrative et al. Each little random issue that we don't think is very important because a pragmatic adult is able to kind of deduce what's right and wrong. These kids they're falling hook, line, and sinker to it. And while they might not be important policy wise, they are important narrative wise. And if we aren't able to win those arguments back, then we have absolutely no prayer in keeping young people around in elections moving forward.
I agree. I think, well, one, the the weed issue and the environmental issue are very different. I'll start with the environmentalism. I do think this is an issue that Republicans have dropped the ball on. Obviously, the left frames it in a certain way. It's a way for them to implement certain policies that would basically cripple this nation's ability to engage in commerce, to be energy independent, et cetera. They all want us to live in the pods and eat the bugs after all. But I do think that there is a need for a coherent policy when it comes to conservationism. I think that involves extending private property rights. I do think it also involves the national parks. I think you can deal with this issue in a nuanced way. I don't necessarily think it's the biggest issue. I think it's a kind of an upper middle class issue. I don't think a lot of regular voters are going to the voting booth thinking about the environment as their number one issue, and if they are, they're generally on the left. But still, we should still have a position on it. And I think conservationism in general, I've heard interesting ideas about a carbon tariff that could be unique from like the populist right point of view. So there are things out there that could be used to tackle it. I also think that the NIMBYism that Joshua was talking about, not in my backyard, they talk a big game about the environment, but then when it comes to, different types of energy that could be renewable or clean, they never want to actually invest in it or have it be anywhere near them. So there's a lot of hypocrisy from the left. They like, the environment kind of as just like a cultural issue that they can talk about. It makes them feel good at their parties and whatever they do, but they're never actually willing to implement the policies that would be necessary to help the environment. And of course, the biggest, offenders environmentally is not the United States. It's really, places like China, et cetera. All these places that have been major benefits of globalism, where their regulations and all their standards are far lower. As it comes to the issue of marijuana and weed, my view of it is that we should, then the libertarians are going to hate me, I think we should definitely not cede ground on this issue. I think as we need to mitigate it. Obviously, I understand all the arguments of the libertarian side of them because I used to believe in them. I do think weed, drug use, all these sort of things are a negative impact on society. I think they make people lazy and dumb. And I think even if we can't end it completely, we should try to do our best to minimize it. And you can still do that through the power of the state. And if it's a losing issue or winning issue, I don't care. I think, in some of these areas, you need to have your principles. I've tried to always make a distinction between what's a good political argument and what's a good ideological argument. In this case, it may be bad politically, and I'm willing to concede that. But I still think it's an issue that we shouldn't just necessarily give up to the left. I think we're putting ourselves in a position where a lot of young people, all they're going to have is Netflix, weed, and a job at an Amazon warehouse. I think we need to strive for higher values in society. I think we need to strive to bring traditional values back into society, starting families, getting your own home, starting a business, being productive members of society. And I think weed culture just runs contrary to all of that. And I think it's kind of a deadbeat culture, and I think it's not healthy. I don't think it's good to promote. It's being promoted through our culture. And I think we need to push back on it and say enough is enough.
So I'll say, I also agree that culturally we should be pushing more traditional values. I know that's probably shocking to hear me say, but within my own life, I find it to be morally uplifting, and I find that I live better when I am living traditionally. But obviously, I do believe we should legalize weed. There are a lot of arguments I have against keeping it illegal. The main one being that it has not stopped drug use. I mean, we have seen the opioid epidemic explode regardless of whether or not it was legal or not. And I think the way that we approach drugs, I think the way that we approach drugs in general is mismanaged and has not worked out for us. The biggest argument I have for legalizing weed is I just don't believe that the punishment fits the crime. And this is kind of what I meant by criminal justice reform. I don't think that violent crimes and non-violent crimes should be treated the same. I think that's a huge mistake. And I don't think that lawmakers really consider what we do to human beings when we throw them in prison. That is a completely dehumanizing process. We basically kill any hope for them in the future of having a job or a stable life. And the chances of someone going back to prison are sky high in the US. So I think we should really reconsider what it is that we make illegal. As far as the climate crisis, I think that there are a lot of bad actors that have spun children into a frenzy to think that the world is going to end. I don't believe that's the case. I think that it's honestly doing a lot of harm to people in our generation, but you know, we do have to have answers for them. I don't think climate change isn't real. I just think it's just a natural process that happens. But I do believe in conservation, and I think there are a lot of organizations that are popping up, like ACC, that are trying to address the need for conservatives to have answers on the climate. And I forget who said this, but college students, every time you go out on campus, that is something that somebody's going to ask you about. So we do need to have answers, even though I don't believe it is as big of a deal as a lot of leftists do.
And now we've come to the end of this. So thank you all. I just want to ask all of you one final question, just quick question. Nobody had this question ahead of time. We're going to start with Zach. I wanted to know, which specific person do you believe as of 2021 has the most important and impactful voice in the conservative movement?
Well, that's not a question. Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump is the conservative movement. And whether or not you like that, this is, I mean, I've said this before, none of us have any say in who is the nominee in 2024. The only person who has any say is Donald Trump. If Donald Trump runs, it's him. If Donald Trump does not run, it's whoever he endorses.
And Gavin, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I agree with Zach. I think Trump is the kingmaker in the party, whether people want to admit it or not. I think you can maybe make an argument that some of the ideological underpinnings, maybe people will look to Tucker. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it really comes down to Trump. Politically speaking, he's going to have the biggest voice, even without his social media, even that he's kind of been deplatformed. That just goes to show how powerful he is, that he could have no platform on any real social media outlet and still have carry the kind of weight that he does. So I think anyone kind of trying to dismiss him would be stupid to do that. And like Zach said, he decides to run, he's the nominee. If he doesn't, we can have a different discussion.
Maggie, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'm going to agree with them. Trump is very, very obviously the leading voice of the conservative movement right now. And it's really interesting because I think the whole reason we're having this Zoom is because the conservative movement has changed so much just from him entering into a presidential primary. It's kind of crazy to think how different the world would be. I don't necessarily think it's any better or worse. I do think he's certainly animated the conservative movement a lot. And I also think that it's a good thing that more and more people are questioning the establishment, but there is no way to make it in politics right now on the right without Trump's endorsement. And I do think it's a little bit of a scary situation to have one person have so much control over an entire party. It just kind of blows my mind, especially when it came to passing spending bills during COVID. I remember Thomas Massey, who's one of my personal favorites. He voted no on the bill, and Donald Trump just went off on him. And it was kind of scary because it was during a primary, and it just kind of blows my mind how much of a gorilla grip he has on the voters. But for better or for worse, I do think he will not enter the 2024 primary. I think he's going to pass the baton on to DeSantis. And that is what I'm actually hoping for, because I do think Ron would be a really, really good figure to unite everybody.
And Julia, would you like me to repeat the question?
No. Who I think is going to be the most influential person, impactful person in the conservative movement, I think that's me. So no, but yes, in a way, that's true. Like, I had a friend who recently became a right-winger. I don't know if I could say conservative, but she was a liberal. She was a lifelong liberal, and she became a right-wing person. And she, after Donald Trump got removed, et cetera, or left the White House, She said, everybody's getting deplatformed. Trump's left. What do I do? Who's going to save us? And I said, the person who's going to save you is you. Everybody, every single person in this movement needs to take on a very, very important and impactful role. No matter how small you think you are, how big you think you are, you need to step up as if you were Trump. And you need to take on the challenges because you need to become impactful. You need to become influential. You need to take over and you need to control your country. So I think I will be doing that role, and I hope that everyone else will be doing that role as well, including Trump and anyone else. I'm open to everybody who wants to be impactful, who wants to be influential. I want them to join the ring because I think every voice is necessary right now.
Great. And Joshua, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I agree with my my fellow young colleagues here that Donald Trump is definitely our guy. The America First movement is here to stay, and I think the best person to dictate it, despite being deplatformed, is Donald Trump. And one thing I kind of want to add, everyone gave a really great analysis today, but I think there's some things that are still pending that might change analysis on the voting base going forward. The Republican Party back in November, after the conclusion of the election, all decided to pack it up and go home and try to talk about where we went wrong. But if you look at the last two elections, 2018 and 2020, in 2020 Donald Trump increased his vote from 2016 by over minimum 11-12 million votes. And I'm down here in Los Angeles County with all these random congressional, state assembly, state senate candidates with ours next to their name that didn't have any money, didn't have any support, had really shoddy websites, but are turning out literally record-breaking numbers for a Republican in those respective districts. And there's one reason for that, and it's because people showed up to support Donald Trump. Donald Trump went online, he went on TV and said, support Republicans, vote Republican, and people did. Now, I think the final thing moving forward is I think the Republican Party and all conservatives need to get on the same page as him as far as election integrity. And as far as us on the ground, whether we're pushing for election integrity, fiscal policy, healthcare, helping our youth dismantle the corrupt narrative against us, it has to be the method of no apologies, which is Donald Trump is the guy that's gonna help us with that method and ultimately help us take our country back.
Perfect. I want to thank you all for participating. Zach, Maggie, Julia, Joshua, Gavin, thank you all for coming on. And I hope everyone gets that these are, in young conservatism, there's a very big ideologically diverse world. It's not all one size fits all. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.